The train whistle pierced the evening air as Theresa Kane pressed her face against the window, watching the harsh landscape of Arizona Territory roll past. It was 1881, and the setting sun cast long shadows across the rugged terrain, much like the shadows that seemed to follow her wherever she went. She adjusted the high-necked collar of her traveling dress, ensuring the fabric concealed what lay beneath. Some scars could be hidden. Others, like the ones that marked her face from jawline to temple, could not. Gallows Hill, next stop. The conductor called out, startling Theresa from her thoughts. The small frontier town had been just a name on a letter until now, a desperate chance at a new beginning. Uncle James had written that the town needed a schoolteacher, and Theresa, with her education and desperate need to escape Boston society, had accepted immediately. The train lurched to a stop, steam billowing past her window. Gathering her small carpet bag, Theresa took a deep breath and pulled her veil lower. It was a flimsy shield against the stares she knew would come, but it provided the illusion of protection. As she stepped onto the wooden platform, the heat hit her like a physical force. Dust swirled around her ankles, and she squinted through her veil at the town that stretched before her, a single dusty street lined with wooden buildings, their false fronts reaching optimistically toward the sky. "Miss Kane," a gruff voice called. She turned to see an older man with a gray beard approaching. "Uncle James," the man nodded, his eyes flickering briefly to the scarred side of her face before settling politely on her eyes. "Welcome to Gallows Hill. Let me take that bag for you." The ride to her uncle's modest house on the edge of town was filled with awkward silence, punctuated by James's occasional comments about the town and its inhabitants. "School term starts in a week," he said as they arrived. "Town's excited to have a real educated lady from back east teaching the children." Theresa nodded, wondering how excited they'd be once they saw what was beneath her veil. Her first week in Gallows Hill passed in a blur of preparation. She kept to herself, venturing out only when necessary, always with her veil in place. But on Sunday, there was no avoiding the town's gathering at the small white church. Whispers followed her down the aisle. Children stared openly, some pointing until their mothers swatted their hands down. The minister welcomed her warmly, but she saw the flicker in his eyes, that moment of shock before Christian charity smoothed his features. "We're blessed to have Miss Kane joining our community as our new schoolteacher," he announced. Theresa felt the weight of every gaze in the church. Some pitying, some curious, some barely disguising their revulsion. A young woman sitting nearby leaned toward her companion and whispered something that made both of them titter behind their gloved hands. The burning humiliation was familiar, but it cut no less deeply for its familiarity. After the service, Theresa slipped away quickly, hurrying back toward her uncle's house. Her vision blurred with unshed tears as she walked briskly, head down. She didn't see the rider until she had nearly collided with his horse. "Whoa there," a deep voice called as the horse sidestepped nervously. "You all right, madam?" Theresa looked up, instinctively turning her unscarred side toward the stranger. "I'm fine. Please excuse me," but the man had already dismounted. He stood before her now, tall and broad-shouldered, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. "Ethan Valero," he said, extending his hand. "Don't believe I've had the pleasure." "Theresa Kane," she replied, reluctantly taking his hand for the briefest moment. "The new schoolteacher." "Ah, James's niece. Welcome to Gallows Hill." She waited for his eyes to find her scars, to see the subtle shift in his expression. Instead, he looked at her directly, his gaze steady and unfaltering. "Thank you, Mr. Valero." "Now, if you'll excuse me, Miss Kane," he interrupted, "I've got a sister about your age. She'd be mighty pleased to make your acquaintance. Perhaps you'd join us for supper sometime this week." The invitation caught her off guard. "That's very kind, but no buts," he said with a smile that transformed his weathered face. "Sarah doesn't get much chance for conversation with other young ladies. Tuesday at 6. Before she could formulate another refusal, he had tipped his hat. remounted his horse and ridden off, leaving Theresa speechless in the dusty street. The first day of school arrived, bringing with it 25 curious children ranging from 6 to 16 years of age. Theresa had abandoned her veil, knowing it would only fuel their fascination. Better to face their stares directly. "Good morning," she said, forcing confidence into her voice. "I am Miss Kane, your new teacher." A small boy in the front row raised his hand immediately. "Yes." "What happened to your face, Miss Kane?" The blunt question hung in the air. Several of the older students looked embarrassed, but most waited eagerly for her answer. "I was caught in a fire when I was 12 years old," she said simply. "Now, shall we begin with our lessons?" But the children's curiosity wasn't so easily diverted. Throughout the day, she caught them staring, whispering. One cruel note was passed among the older girls, resulting in stifled giggles that pierced Theresa like physical blows. When the school day finally ended, Theresa remained at her desk, her composure crumbling as the last student departed. She pressed her palms against her eyes, willing herself not to cry. She had endured far worse in Boston's society ballrooms. She could endure this. Rough first day. She looked up with a start. Ethan Valero stood in the doorway, hat in hand. "Mr. Valero, what can I do for you?" "Just checking if you're still coming for supper tonight. Sarah's been baking all day." Theresa had forgotten the invitation entirely. "I don't think it'll do you good to get out," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Can't let those young scoundrels see they got to you." There was something about his direct manner that made it difficult to refuse. "Very well, Mr. Valero, 6 o'clock. The Valero Ranch sat a mile outside of town, a modest spread with a sturdy cabin, a barn, and a corral full of horses. Sarah Valero turned out to be a vivacious young woman whose warmth seemed genuine. "Ethan's told me all about the new schoolteacher," she said, taking Theresa's hands in hers. "I'm so glad you've come to Gallows Hill. This place needs some refinement." Dinner was simple but delicious: beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie. The conversation flowed more easily than Theresa had expected, with Sarah asking questions about Boston and Ethan occasionally interjecting with dry humor. "How did you come to ranching, Mr. Valero?" Theresa asked, curious about the man who seemed so at ease in his own skin. "Born to it," he replied. "My father ran cattle in Texas. After the war, we moved north, started fresh here when I was 18, been building it ever since." "Ethan's too modest," Sarah said. "He's one of the most respected ranchers in the territory. Even the big outfits think twice before crossing him." Ethan waved away the praise. "Tell us more about yourself, Miss Kane. What brings a Boston lady to our dusty corner of the world?" Theresa hesitated, toying with her spoon. "A change of scenery, and the teaching position, of course." "Must be quite a change from city life," he observed, his eyes intent on her face. She nodded, aware that he was looking at her fully, not avoiding her scars but not fixating on them either. It was disarming. After dinner, Ethan offered to drive her back to town in his buckboard. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamond dust. "Your sister is lovely," Theresa said as they rode. "She likes you," he replied. "Says you've got spirit." Theresa laughed softly. "I'm not sure about that." "I am," Ethan said. "Takes spirit to face a classroom full of curious kids with no shield." She turned to look at him, surprised. "You noticed I wasn't wearing my veil." "I notice a lot of things, Miss Kane." When they reached her uncle's house, Ethan helped her down from the buckboard, his hands strong and sure at her waist. For a moment they stood close, and Theresa felt an unfamiliar flutter in her chest. "Thank you for the evening, Mr. Valero." "Ethan," he corrected. "And it was my pleasure." Over the next few weeks, Theresa settled into a routine. The children's fascination with her scars gradually faded as she proved herself a capable and fair teacher. The adults of Gallows Hill were another matter. Some, like the minister and the general store owner, treated her with careful courtesy. Others made little attempt to hide their discomfort or disdain. Mrs. Porter, the banker's wife and self-appointed arbiter of the town's social hierarchy, was the worst. Her comments, always delivered with a thin veneer of concern cut deeply. Such a shame, a young woman marked so. "Permanently," she said one afternoon as Theresa selected fabric at the general store. "I don't suppose you've considered one of those surgical procedures they're developing back east. My cousin's husband is a physician in Philadelphia, and he says they're making remarkable advances." "No, Mrs. Porter, I haven't," Theresa replied stiffly. "Well, perhaps it's for the best. Even with surgery, you could never expect to marry well. At least as a teacher, you have a respectable occupation." Theresa left the store quickly, humiliation burning in her chest. She was so distracted that she nearly walked into Ethan again, who was tying his horse outside the blacksmith shop. "Whoa there," he said, catching her elbow to steady her. "Twice now, people will talk." But his smile faded when he saw her expression. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," she said, attempting to pull away. "Just in a hurry." His hand remained gentle but firm on her arm. "Sarah's coming to town tomorrow, said she'd like to take you to lunch at the hotel. Would you like that?" The simple kindness nearly undid her. "Yes," she managed. "Yes, I would." As the weeks passed, Theresa found herself spending more time with the Valeros. Sunday dinners at their ranch became a welcome ritual. Sarah's friendship was a balm to her wounded spirit, and Ethan was becoming something she dared not name, even to herself. He never mentioned her scars. Never stared or avoided looking at them. He treated her as if they were simply a part of her, neither defining nor diminishing her. One golden October afternoon, Ethan invited her to ride out to see a hidden valley on his property. Sarah packed them a picnic, her eyes twinkling with barely suppressed delight as they rode off together. The valley was beautiful, a small green oasis nestled between rocky hills, with a clear stream running through it. "It's lovely," Theresa said as they spread a blanket near the water. "Found it by accident," Ethan said, settling beside her. "Got lost chasing a stray during my first year here. Sometimes the best things in life come from getting knocked off your planned trail." Something in his tone made her look at him. He was watching her with an intensity that made her heart skip. "Why do you never ask about my scars?" she blurted out. Ethan considered the question. "Figure you'd tell me if you wanted to, and they're part of you. Don't need to know how they got there to see who you are now." "And who am I, Ethan Valero?" he smiled, slow and deliberate. "You're the strongest, most beautiful woman I've ever met." Theresa looked away, emotion tightening her throat. "Don't mock me." "Never," he said, his voice suddenly fierce. He reached out, gently turning her face back toward him. His thumb brushed lightly over the ridged skin at her jawline. "These marks tell me you survived something that would have broken most people. They're not something to hide. They're the map that led me to you." And then he kissed her, softly at first, then with growing intensity as she responded, her hands finding their way to his shoulders. When they finally parted, both breathless, Theresa felt as though some frozen part of her had suddenly thawed. "I've wanted to do that since the moment I saw you on that dusty street," Ethan admitted. Theresa laughed, the sound bubbling up from some long-forgotten place of joy. "Even with the veil, especially with the veil, made me curious what you were hiding. And now that you know." "Now I know I was right to be curious." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I'm falling in love with you, Theresa Kane." The words, spoken so plainly, struck her like physical blows. "You can't," she whispered. "Pretty sure I can," he replied with a half-smile. "Been doing it for weeks now." "Ethan," she said, pulling away slightly, "you don't understand what it would mean, the things people would say, the way they would look at you." His expression hardened. "You think I give a damn what the likes of Henrietta Porter thinks?" "This is the frontier, Theresa. Out here a man is judged by his actions, not by who he courts or marries." "Marries?" The word came out as barely a whisper. Ethan's confidence faltered for the first time. "I'm getting ahead of myself, but yes, that's where my thoughts have been heading." "If you'd consider it." Theresa stood abruptly, moving to the edge of the stream. "I came to Gallows Hill to escape pity and revulsion I never expected." She trailed off, unable to articulate the tumult of emotions within her. Ethan remained seated, giving her space. "Tell me about the fire," he said quietly. The request, spoken so simply, broke something loose inside her. The story she had held close for so many years spilled out: the boarding school, the lamp that overturned in the night, the flames that spread so quickly, trapping her and 3 other girls. How she had gone back to help the youngest girl and become caught beneath a burning beam. How the rescuers had pulled her out, but not before the fire had claimed part of her face and shoulder. "The other girls recovered completely," she finished. "I was the only one marked permanently. When I returned to Boston, everything had changed. The invitations stopped coming. My fiancé broke our engagement. Even my own mother could barely look at me without flinching." Ethan had moved to stand beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "Their loss," he said simply. "Their blindness doesn't diminish your worth." She turned to face him, searching his eyes for any hint of pity or revulsion and finding none. "How can you look at me and not see the scars first?" "Because I see you first," he replied. "Theresa who reads poetry to her students. Theresa who laughs at my terrible jokes. Theresa who stands up to Henrietta Porter even when her hands are shaking. The scars are just part of the story that made you her." They returned to town in a comfortable silence, something fundamental having shifted between them. As the days grew shorter and the nights colder, their courtship blossomed openly. Sarah was delighted, Uncle James bemused but approving, and the town talked. "A man like Ethan Valero could have any woman in the territory," Theresa overheard Mrs. Porter saying outside the general store. "To saddle himself with a scarred spinster from back east, it's positively charitable of him." The words stung, but their power to wound her had diminished. Ethan's love was like armor, protecting her from the barbs of small minds. In late November, as the first snow dusted the mountains in the distance, Ethan took her riding again, this time to show her a spot where he was considering building a new house. "The ranch house is fine for now," he explained as they dismounted, "but it's getting too small for me and Sarah, and if there were to be additions to the family, we'd need more room." Theresa's heart quickened at his meaning. "It's a beautiful location. I thought so." He took her hands in his. "Theresa, I'm not a man for fancy words or grand gestures, but I know what I want, and that's a life with you. Will you marry me?" She looked up at this man who had somehow seen past her scars to the woman beneath, and for the first time in years she felt truly beautiful. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and clear. "Yes, I will marry you, Ethan Valero." Their wedding in early December was a simple affair at the town's small church. Sarah stood as Theresa's bridesmaid, beaming with joy. Uncle James gave her away, his gruff demeanor softened by obvious emotion. Most of the town attended, some out of genuine goodwill, others out of curiosity or a desire to witness what they considered an odd match. Theresa wore a dress of pale blue silk with a high collar that concealed the scars on her shoulder, but her face she left unveiled. Let them see, she thought as she walked down the aisle. Let them see that love sees differently. Ethan waited for her at the altar, his eyes never leaving her face as she approached. When they joined hands, he squeezed hers gently, a silent affirmation. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, and Theresa felt a surge of joy so powerful it nearly brought her to her knees. They moved into the ranch house after the wedding, with plans to begin construction on the new house in spring. Sarah had insisted on giving them the main bedroom, moving herself into the smaller room until the new house was ready. Life settled into a new rhythm. Theresa continued teaching, riding to and from town with Ethan when their schedules aligned. In the evenings, they would sit before the fire, sometimes reading aloud to each other, sometimes simply existing in companionable silence. It was during one such evening in late January that Ethan asked a question that had clearly been on his mind. "You ever think about going back to Boston?" "To show them," Theresa looked up from her book, surprised. "Show them what? That you found happiness, that their rejection didn't break you?" She considered the question seriously. "No," she said finally. "What would be the point? They're part of a life I no longer want or need." Ethan nodded, satisfied with her answer. Just wondered if you missed any of it, the theaters, the fancy restaurants. I miss some things, she admitted, but nothing I wouldn't gladly trade for this life, for you. Spring came to the Arizona territory in a riot of wildflowers and new growth. Construction began on the new house, a sturdy two-story structure with a wide porch that would face the sunrise. As the house took shape, so too did other changes. Sarah announced her engagement to the town's young doctor, a match that delighted both Ethan and Theresa. And Theresa herself confirmed what she had suspected for several weeks: they would be welcoming a child by autumn. Ethan's joy at the news was boundless. He lifted her in his arms, spinning her around until she laughingly begged him to stop. That night, as they lay together in the darkness, his hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach, he whispered, "I never thought I could be this happy." "Nor I," she replied, turning to face him. "For so long I believed my scars had determined my fate, that no one would ever see past them." "Their loss," he said, echoing his words from months before, "and my incredible gain." The new house was ready by August, just as Theresa's pregnancy became impossible to conceal. The school board, progressive for its time, had agreed to let her continue teaching until the birth, with a young woman from a neighboring town ready to take over afterward. On a warm September evening, as Theresa sat on the porch of their new home watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson, she felt the first sharp pain. By midnight, after hours of labor with Sarah and the doctor in attendance, she gave birth to a healthy daughter with a shock of dark hair and her father's determined chin. Ethan, who had paced the hallway throughout her labor, was finally allowed in. His face, when he saw Theresa holding their child, reflected such raw emotion that it brought tears to her eyes. "She's perfect," he whispered, sitting carefully beside them on the bed. "Just like her mother," Theresa laughed softly. "Flatterer." "Truth-teller," he corrected, leaning in to kiss her forehead. "What shall we name her?" They had discussed names but had not settled on one. Now, looking at the tiny face of their daughter, Theresa knew. "Hope," she said. "Let's call her Hope." Ethan's smile deepened. "Hope Valero, perfect." As autumn deepened toward winter again, Theresa often found herself standing at the window of their home, Hope in her arms, watching the changing landscape. One evening, as snow began to fall in lazy flakes, Ethan came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around both of them. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. "About paths," she replied. "How the worst moments of our lives can lead us to the best. How my scars, which I believed had ruined my life, eventually led me here, to you, to hope, to happiness," Ethan added. "Yes," she agreed, turning in his arms to face him. "To happiness." Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the landscape in a clean white blanket. Inside, warmed by the fire and by love stronger than any scar, Theresa Kane Valero knew that she had finally found where she belonged. 3 years later, as they celebrated Hope's 3rd birthday and awaited the arrival of their second child, a letter arrived from Boston. Theresa recognized her mother's handwriting immediately. With trembling hands, she opened it, reading the carefully penned words that spoke of regret, of years wasted in foolish pride, of a mother's belated understanding that true beauty was more than skin deep. "Will you write back?" Ethan asked that night after she had shared the contents with him. Theresa looked around their home at Hope sleeping peacefully in her small bed, at the cradle waiting for the new baby, at the man who had taught her to see her scars as a map rather than a mark of shame. "Yes," she said. "I'll invite her to visit, to meet her grandchildren. To see that sometimes, the most beautiful lives are built from the ashes of what was destroyed." Ethan took her hand, his thumb brushing over the wedding band he had placed there 4 years earlier. "You are extraordinary, Theresa Valero." She smiled, the scars on her face shifting with the movement, no longer a source of shame but a testament to her journey. "We are extraordinary together." And as the fire crackled in the hearth and the snow fell silently outside, Theresa knew that some marks were meant to guide us home to the people who would love us not despite our scars, but because of the strength and beauty they revealed.